Value Impulses, the podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. A warm welcome to everyone, dear listeners, to today's episode entitled The Integration of Positive Psychology into the Working World. Is it worth it? I think the question mark is important here. I'll divide the structure into 3 parts. We'll start, first of all, with the, positive side of the positive. I think it's very important that we dive into this. Then, secondly, the practical application is important to me. Yes, what does it actually look like in practice? And thirdly, I also say, it's no panacea, right? We have to reflect. Positivity for positivity's sake can also be misleading. So stay tuned, dear listeners. So, in this episode, I'd like to go into an intervention strategy for teams, leadership, and entire organizations that hasn't been very prominent so far. So I believe that positive psychology has the potential to be applied more and thereby truly improve our work results. Yes, as a separate branch, as they say. In psychology, empirical psychology, it makes important contributions to maintaining, mental health, scientifically proven, quality of life, and well-being. And especially in the workplace, where our health is often put to the test, where things are often annoying and difficult and not at all easy, these findings have, in my opinion, a very remarkable influence. So the integration, if we look at it that way, if we bring it in, positive psychology, into the working world, can therefore provide a lot of support in promoting the individual and mental stability as well. So, mental health plays a role here. And then also has a positive effect on work performance, on job satisfaction, and above all, on commitment. Let's dive in. As an introduction, positive psychology, what is it exactly? Well, it promotes well-being, life satisfaction, and mental performance, for essentially comprehensive mental health. For those who want to explore this in more detail or read up on it, I recommend Martin Seligman, or Seligman in English, who defined learned helplessness as a, let's say, somewhat provocative term and researched very precisely what effects it has on us, both positive and negative. Is also negative, right? And the goals of positive psychology are, of course, the improvement of well-being and quality of life by promoting strengths and resources, So the cultivation of positive emotions and optimism, right? And with that, so cultivation, I think, is an important word, building resilience. Of robustness and promoting meaning and purpose in life, right? And sure, in traditional psychology, there has always been. So the treatment of mental illnesses and problems has always been, treated or initiated with positive psychology, even if we didn't know exactly what it was, right? The focus is on the pursuit of happiness. Americans all know this. The pursuit of happiness is something that is very deeply, anchored in the Constitution and also in the American soul. So fulfillment and positive life experiences, and if you now examine positive psychology a bit and look into it, then we're basically right at Hartman, right? How can you define and measure happiness and Hartman says it quite simply in the end. So everyone's life goal, and thus also a successful life, Robert S. Hartman says, is to enrich the universe in a positive sense, so a friend of mine also likes to say. To leave a dent in the universe, what's important is that it's a positive dent, so that you make an impact and leave something behind with your skills. And that is already happiness. You could say that. Happiness research is something that isn't quite, simple and is quite complex. How can subjective well-being be increased? If you read Harari, then it's ultimately dependent solely on hormones. And we have to deceive ourselves to some extent, in quotation marks, to feel happy. I find that a bit disheartening and also not quite my thing, the happiness researcher from Hungary. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, or something like that, you can't pronounce his last name, who developed flow. So how are people actually happy when demands and also skills are in a reasonable balance? And through that, so to speak, when you're then in the flow, you feel this happiness and... Yeah, a few days ago I read another article in the media about happiness research, and I think for the 7th time in a row, the Finns are the happiest nation in the whole world. Congratulations to Finland. It's actually quite amazing, right? They have polar nights there, it's really inhospitable and so on. But they somehow manage. And for the Germans, I read somewhere that we've slipped from 18th to 24th place, or something like that. Slipped down, so happiness is obviously very subjective, but I find it interesting when it's measured at a national level, or maybe even at a regional level. You always hear about studies showing that Crete has the most centenarians. And some Japanese island too, which ultimately has to do with health, of course, but also with happiness. And in that sense, I believe they're truly connected, which is why our episode, Integrating Positive Psychology into the Workplace, is it worth it? I say it is worth it. So, the positive side of the positive is something we should keep in mind. Let's move on to Step 2, into practice. Yes, there are obviously numerous areas of application for this. Let's take a look at schools and daycares. Yes, even if we don't yet know exactly how we're being shaped, we are being shaped as little beings, whether it's in a negative or a positive way. So, just how important is it to actually introduce positive psychology from early childhood and to help develop people in a way that they can really see the positive, the chances, and the opportunities as well, and don't necessarily have traumatic negative experiences that then stay with them. And often it's the case that we basically say we're a repair shop. And we have to iron out the mistakes or the bad things that happened in childhood and youth that shaped us, through therapy later on, so to speak. Wouldn't it be much smarter to start with positive psychology very, very early on? But regardless of that, I think it's useful to bring that into every workplace. Yes, and I mean, the healthcare system is showing that now too, so it's simply been proven to be a support for patients in coping with illnesses. And so, my goal is, I'm a small company, we're a small team, yes, but of course I've already worked intensively with over 300 companies and I know what well-being is, or are factors that increase the well-being of employees. And these are often precisely the positive interventions, yes. And it's also been proven that positive interventions, when applied long-term, have the potential, yes, not only to increase people's well-being, but also to increase the personal resources of the staff. Yes. So, why does this make sense? Well, because there's simply a positive correlation between health, quality, interpersonal relationships, very important, and also work performance. And now, let's just consult our common sense. Ask yourself, dear listeners, if I say, happy people are more successful. Yes, that's true. And why is that? Because they have more resources at their disposal, because they, yes, simply don't have to waste anything on negative activity or negative energy. Yes. And research suggests a very high level of effectiveness there. And if we look at it quite practically, I'm on the second point, positive psychology in practice. For me, this positivity has 3 components. I also described it in my book, Key Factor Value-Based Leadership. One is respect. Yes, that's this brain thing. So, of course, I show respect to every other human being. and, so to speak, perceive and interact with them here in a way that reflects exactly that. And that's something positive, yes. That means, then, that negativity never arises there. Respect is positive psychology, but only from the brain side. And we also have to address the hand side, the practical value dimension. According to Hartman, 3 value dimensions: brain, hand, and heart. And for me, that's actually appreciation, right? So, positive psychology is so easy to introduce, with the hand aspect, with the practical aspect. In daily life, that I simply say, hey, that's well done. Hey, thanks a lot for the effort you're putting in. You've actually moved us forward here. Yes. And this terrible proverb, not being scolded is praise enough, is the exact opposite of that. Yes. As pack animals, as social beings, we humans are dependent on feedback. Yes, okay, on mutual recognition as well, which we should give and, of course, also receive. And that's why, the second point after respect is, for me, appreciation, to actually do that proactively. And appreciation means positive psychology to me. That doesn't mean that you don't also criticize. You should do that too, of course. You have to do that. But if we think about how often we as leaders take it completely for granted that everything is running smoothly and think, well, there's no need for appreciation. We don't even think it, we're just not aware of it. And that's why I say the hands-on aspect of positive psychology to proactively express appreciation is very, very important. And besides respect and appreciation, so besides the brain and the hand, there's also the heart. And for me, in positive psychology, that's eye level. I've described it in detail in the book. Eye level is often seen more systemically, but I see the eye as the eye. So let's look into the other person's eye. There we see warmth, we see the person we really see. Full humanity. And that's why for me it's something quite different from respect or appreciation. It's eye level, looking into the other person's eye, and thus conveying the emotion and the emotional positivity. So positive psychology is also very much about feeling. And body language can do that too. It can be a moment, as they say, but specifically being in the other person's eye. And sometimes the social conventions we have are not to look the other person in the eye for too long because it could somehow be an affront or something similar. I think we don't look into each other's eyes enough. So for positive psychology, look into each other's eyes, look at each other and see what you see in those eyes. And there is often a lot of positive things, a lot that can also work for positive psychology. And now the big but, because positive psychology, positivity, everything is always positive. Careful, we must not allow for any wide-eyed positivism. And here, I always like to use Jim Collins, who is a well-known business author and researcher, as a role model. He elaborated on what he calls the Stockdale paradox, which is a concept about facing the brutal facts while never losing faith, in his famous book called From Good to Great. Admiral or what? General, I don't quite remember. Stockdale was a prisoner in the Vietnam War, the highest-ranking general, so to speak, from the United States. He was in the so-called Hanoi Hilton for 8 years, as they called it, the prisoner of war camp in Vietnam. And Jim Collins interviewed him and then asked, well, so. How did you manage to get the men to survive this prisoner of war captivity? And then, of course, he tells quite a bit. And sure, he established a way to communicate among them, so they could talk using a kind of tapping code and so on. And tried to involve as many people as possible in that. But then, to the question, well, who actually made it? Who wasn't, so to speak, psychologically broken? Who is mentally healthy? and in that sense came out of the whole thing with positive psychology, right? Then he says, well, look, the ones who didn't make it were the optimists. And Jim Collins is like, what, how? Yeah, so the people who said, oh, we're getting out of here by Christmas, we'll be out by Christmas, or we'll be out by Easter, and Christmas came and went, and Easter came and went, and they were broken at the end of the day. So, what Stockdale already said, you must never lose faith in a good ending. That has to be there, yeah, otherwise you're lost. But you have to face the realities, no matter how brutal they may be. Yeah, Stockdale, he partially mutilated himself to some extent and so on. So they couldn't portray him as if he were well treated in this prisoner of war camp. So it's really dramatic what he went through, and I really highly recommend a book by Jim Collins. So we must, despite all the positive psychology, we shouldn't build a perfect world. Everything's nice, everything's wonderful, but let's face the brutal facts, as he also says. So we have to look the really hard facts squarely in the eye. But behind that, always have the understanding and the deep, deep faith that it will turn out well. Yeah, and whoever just whitewashes everything with positivity, well, they won't achieve success. And I think we also have to say that very, very clearly here. Conclusion. So, as a final point, the integration of positive psychology into everyday life is something really important, and we can also give ourselves a few rituals there. Before work, after work. By the way, keeping a journal is a very, very good thing there. I've neglected it again. I should do it more often. But also take a look at Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, who very, very well also describes this planning. His focus is the week, these 7 days. That's something where we can really plan and also bring in positivity, our various roles. That we have in life, right? I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a consultant, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a trainer. And to also play these roles. The best way to do that, from a positive perspective, is with positive psychology. Through weekly planning, you can actually do that. So mindfulness is important, finding meaning and purpose for yourself. Reflecting on your own values, your own potential, and your goals, right? And I've said it before in one podcast or another, in one episode or another. There are 4 questions or 4 steps to develop yourself. First of all, know yourself, so recognize who you are. What can you do? What potential do you have? And what do you not have? So first, know yourself. What is there in terms of material, so to speak? Second, to accept yourself as you are and not chase after any pipe dreams. To say, this is what I have and this is what I want to develop. And that's step 3, build yourself, build who you are. We can actually develop ourselves as human beings from a constructive standpoint, because we have the ability to abstract from the here and now and actually set goals, and then pursue them and develop ourselves. And after step 3, it often stops. Because people say, that's fine once I've developed. No, 4th. Give of yourself, give back to society. You were able to start on the work of millions, billions of people who came before you. You're standing on their shoulders, so to speak, of these giants, and you can get going and develop. And now it is your damn duty to also give back, so that others can also start as far forward and as high up as possible. I'll leave it at that for today. Maybe just one more note for you. Please feel free to leave us a review on Spotify or the other platforms. In your podcast player, and maybe just follow us on Profiling Values. Please do so on LinkedIn. That would really, really please us. And we also have 2 sources on positive psychology that I'll put in the show notes. Now I'd like to thank you very much, dear listener, for being here. Here at the end with positive psychology, which really resonates with me emotionally. And I hope we'll hear from each other again very, very soon. Thank you. Bye.